Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here to listen to me talk about how we approach solar PV at SEGRO. If you don't know who SEGRO are, we're an industrial REIT, which is a real estate investment trust. We're pan-European. We operate in 10 countries across the UK and Europe. We've got around 6,000 square metres of space. And the market that we're in is industrial, which includes logistics hubs, which will be anywhere from 100,000 square feet to perhaps 700,000 square feet, plus warehouses and data centres, which is a really big market for us. We have around 1,600 buildings as well, so it's quite a significant portfolio. I think we're probably Europe's largest in terms of square footage now. So for PV, here's some quick facts and figures. We have a portfolio of just over 15 megawatt peak of solar PV capacity across the group, and within that we have 9.2 megawatt peak, which is what we term wholly owned, so they're the systems that we own, and we have 5.9 megawatt peak of systems that are third party owned. So that was a bit of a historic project that we did, which we ceased working with that program in 2013, where we would rent our roof space in Germany to the energy companies. They would put PV panels on and the energy would go out to the grid. I'll come on to why we stopped doing that a little bit more in detail further on in the presentation. So we have 51 systems ranging from 10 kilowatt peak to 1 megawatt peak, around 12 million kilowatt hours of annual generation, saving approximately 5,500 tonnes of CO2. The financial benefit, including income and benefit in terms of cost savings to our occupiers, is around £3 million annually, and we've got projects in the UK, Germany, France, Italy, Belgium and the Netherlands. Over time, this is how we've progressed with PV, and unfortunately we don't have 2016 on there. We've got, as I said, the total capacity of around 15 meg. Perhaps to the end of 2016 we might have that up to 18 meg, depending on how we get on in the Netherlands. But generally in 2010 it was some small involvement in the UK when the feed-in tariff came in, a bit of growth of the third-party systems in Germany. In 2011 we had a 1 megawatt peak system in Belgium, where we operated a PPA, a power purchase agreement, with the occupier. Steady growth from 2012 to 2013, and then it really kind of shot up in 2014, where we ramped up our operations in the UK after we really got some scale out of the business model, which I will be explaining to you later. And midway through 2015 we purchased the 5.9 megawatt peak rooftop based system as part of a deal to buy an Italian developer called Veilog. So we purchased all their properties, their development pipeline, and that included the the roof mounted PV system. So this is how it breaks down country by country. In grey you have the third party owned stuff, which is not the kind of prime stuff that we're interested in at the minute, and in red we have the wholly owned portfolio. As you can see, Italy is quite dominant there with 6 megawatt peak. The UK, whilst we've got 2 megawatt peak, obviously a third of the Italian portfolio, so quite a lot smaller. That's actually the most profitable, and it's the easiest model to work with, given the feed-in tariff and the way that the power purchase agreements work in the UK, being far easier than in Europe, in that you're allowed to share the benefit without paying any extra tax. In countries such as Germany, if you own the system as the property company and try and set up a PPA to sell the energy to the occupier, you get taxed differently, so it's not financially viable to do that. Hence we went the third party route originally. So this is my experience and perspective on the FIT support, which has obviously driven PV progress in the UK in commercial real estate over the years. In 2010 we had around 33 pence per kilowatt hour generated, which felt like a great amount at the time. In 2011, towards the back end, it was quite severely cut to around 13p per kilowatt hour, because too many systems, we were told, came on stream, and DEC etc. wanted to kind of rein in the financials of it. And then towards the back end of 2015 we had a further significant cut to 2.4p per kilowatt hour, which kind of rocked the industry again. It feels like there's always a change on the horizon, but I don't see how they can go much lower than this now, thankfully. So my perception of how things went at these times, in 2010 it felt like a bit of an unknown quantity. Was it too good to be true? You know, the income is quite high there. I felt that we had some supply chain issues in that there were lots of newish companies coming on board trying to get projects underway. They might not have had the heritage that you would expect if you're a large commercial real estate company. We did see when the cuts came in 2011, a lot of companies did go bust, so then it caused warranty issues. So it was good not to be too heavily involved at that stage. I think the project costs were quite high, so probably around £2,000 per kilowatt peak installed. However, that was kind of negated by the high fit rate. So what we were seeing there was essentially around a 10-year payback, even though the construction costs were high, the fit and the income was high, so it gave you that 10-year payback. Then when the cuts came in, there was an initial lull from my perspective. There was definitely a changing of mind. So when we're trying to get projects done with development managers, asset managers, etc., so what we call non-sustainability roles, there was a kind of lack of confidence, lots of questions about how secure is this subsidy or incentive now, you know, are they going to pull the rug from under us again? So you have to go through the whole sort of getting people on board again, you know, that it's locked in for 20, 25 years, etc. After a while, we saw project costs readjust, so the installation costs came down with the lower fit. It kind of normalised, so you were still getting the same percentage returns, although the absolute figures were lower. We had to develop a new business model in line with these cuts. Around 2010, we didn't have any PPAs. We were only involved in a small way in SEGRO UK, but with 32, 33p a unit, we didn't need a PPA. In 2011, we needed a PPA, so we needed to generate a secondary income stream to kind of fill a bit of the gap that has been lost from the cut in the feed-in tariff. And at that time, we developed a business model that took into account all the property-specific issues, which I'll come to in future, that helped us then really kind of maximise what we can do in the days of the 2.4, 2.3 pence per kilowatt feed-in tariff. What I saw here was a race to the line before the deadline. So when we knew the date of the rates being cut, it was hard to find contractors in some cases, and everyone was really busy. Internally, it was kind of we want what we can't have. So I think when something has been taken away, everyone seemed to be more interested in it, which was a little bit frustrating. We now need to focus on how we can get the build costs down and how we can maximise the project size, given that things are much tighter now with the lower feed-in tariff, and I'll come to that in my case study. But it's mainly looking at extra benefits, so how can you improve the EPC with PV? Can you achieve a zero carbon building with PV? So the drivers for our model, basically we decided rather than being piecemeal in this, we wanted to create a standalone budget that we could deliver the model through. The model is driven by us being a long-term investor, so SEGRO, we do all our own developments, refurbishments, asset management, leasing, property management and everything, so I have a really close relationship with our customers, so there's an incentive for us there to build the best building, offer some benefits and get a positive reaction there from our customers. We've got prime assets generally in prime locations, and we think that our property service is a premium property service, so occupiers are going to expect, I think with a prime asset now, some sustainability features. It's also about income generation, so maximising the income for these property assets. Any additional income over rent is great. It goes onto the valuation, makes the book look good. It's also about future-proofing our assets. So we have other legislation that has a knock-on effect of the future for our buildings. So MEES, the minimum EPC standards. Over time, you want your buildings to be at the highest EPC rating possible. If you can up that through using a larger PV system in some way, then that's a benefit. And it's also a differentiator. We feel that if there's an identical building next to ours from a competitor, and we have this PV offering, which saves the occupier money and gives them an environmental benefit that they can use for their PR, etc., it sets us apart. So how our model works, again, I said we set aside a budget that we wanted to use to roll out this business model. The way that we go about it is that we will identify prime sites that we feel we can get the best PV systems on. So that's generally, it might be our larger buildings, it might be the newer stock, or it might be a refurbishment that is having a new roof put on, because there's construction cost benefits there. SEGRO pay the capex, so there's no capital requirement from the occupier. We will pay everything, all the installation costs, etc. We take responsibility for the maintenance and operation as well. We found that when we started off doing these projects, selling the energy to our tenants, some of them had concerns about how maintenance costs might unexpectedly go through the roof, etc. And they just wanted an easier life. So we said, we'll pay for the maintenance, we'll operate these systems. We have an online system that monitors for any faults and monitors output. We share all that data with them, and that works really well. The customer then signs up to a PPA, a power purchase agreement, and we try to offer them a cost saving based against what they pay. So in the lease, the power purchase agreement will lock the rate that they pay us at a certain percentage below market rate. So it's a really open book way of saying we're giving you a cost saving here, and also an environmental benefit. There's no obligation beyond the lease. So another kickback that we had from occupiers was, what happens if we just leave the lease? Is there any obligation? Do we have to pay you anything? We said no, we'll take that risk. So in our model, we always build in a year of vacancy in the worst case scenario. As I said, it locks in a cost saving and tracks below market rate, and we cover new developments, refurbishments and standing stock with this model, and it can be used as a really good tool in standing stock where you might have a lease renewal coming up, and you can go into that negotiation potentially with the offer of a PV project there to help those negotiations go through. So this was all working really well with the 2011 rates. When the 2015 rates came in, it presented more of a challenge. The income generated from the fit had significantly reduced, so we needed to do something a little bit different. So I wanted to quickly talk you through this case study of Navigation Park, which we've just completed, and it's over in Enfield. It's a 465 kilowatt peak system across 3 industrial units. We have achieved zero carbon status for this building, and as I say, that's the first in London. I'm going to go through how we did that a little bit later on, and it's a real key driver for sizing up the PV system. So post-fit, the challenges for us were obviously reduced fit income tied to PPA. So whereas before we might be able to offer a saving on the energy of around 40% for the occupier, we now had to rein that in a little bit because the financials didn't stack up, being that generous any longer. There was a quick turnaround, so this project was already working through the design stages. When we decided we wanted to do the big PV system, it meant engaging with the team and bringing our PV consultants in there. There's some property-specific issues when you're selling energy to the tenant, as I mentioned, maintenance. There's also insurance, what happens if the system breaks, etc. How do you cover the income lost? Access for maintenance, you need to include that in the lease. The power purchase agreement is its own section within the lease, and it covers the rate that the occupier will pay for us and allowing us access for maintenance, etc., and to not damage the panels. And then a key area as well was marketing. So the message has to be really clear. These buildings are all speculative, so that means that there's no occupier lined up. If there is an occupier lined up, then it's really easy to have a one-on-one conversation with them, and you know their business and what they're going to be doing in that building, so you can fit the PV offering to their operation. When it's speculative, you need to be able to account for whomever might want to be interested in that building. So the marketing, we put together a 2-page flyer, really concisely, kind of told them, no cost obligation, this is what it's going to save you, this is how it works, and that worked really well. So the response for us on this, given the lower fit, was we identified that we could achieve zero carbon status for the building, which I'll come to in a second. We had great experience, given that we've been active in this area for quite a while in our own internal development team, so they knew how to do the larger size PV systems. The PPA back catalogue and the lessons that we'd learned over time in the lease negotiations with previous occupiers, it meant that we were able to kind of head off any objections potential occupiers might have about the PV clauses in the lease. The effective marketing strategy, again, was key. A lean and cost-effective design. So I'll come to that again in future. But sometimes when we have a PV system, it's not just about lumping the biggest PV system that you can get on there. It's about optimising it. So how can we angle the panels, what different panel options can we use, and the consultancy that we work with do all that long-term modelling for us, so it helps us make the right long-term choice. I think if we were a developer that was flipping assets, i.e. just selling them straight out once they're completed, then there's less of an incentive to look long-term, but when you're holding assets, there's an incentive there for you. And again, value added. So the value of the income streams here goes onto the buildings, which all the development managers really like. So in getting zero carbon status, this isn't the clearest pie chart here. There are 3 scopes that you can go through to get zero carbon status. So scope 3 is embodied emissions within the building materials, and it includes maintenance of the building once it's in operation. That's, I think, something that will come in the future. It's really hard to measure. Occupiers won't understand it, so we didn't go for scope 3. Scope 2 is unregulated operational energy use, and basically that means anything that is plugged in, such as servers, computers, fans, etc. That is outside of SEGRO's control. The business model that we have is we build a building as a shell and core, we do some of the lighting and heating fit out, and then the occupier comes in and they fit it out with their own finishes. So that was outside our control, and the marketing angle wouldn't have been very clear if we'd have included scope 2. So therefore we decided to go scope 1, which is regulated energy use. So that's anything basically that uses energy or affects energy use that is not plugged in. So things like your lighting, your heating, your cooling systems that form the building fabric, and all these items go into the EPC calculation. And if you get an EPC A+ through the model, then that is termed as being net zero CO2 emissions. So the building, all 3 buildings achieved this A+ EPC status, which is actually really good for the marketing because it's quite a clear and concise way to communicate that you've achieved that standard. The report was for zero carbon was all independently verified, and a key part of it was involving the large solar PV system. So for base build, we only needed to do around 80 kilowatt peak across the 3 units, but what we ended up doing was 465 kilowatt peak, and that was because we identified that the building fabric had a performance of probably an EPC A. If we were to optimise that a little bit and then include the energy generation from a large PV system, it helped us make it net zero. So it was the PV system that pushed everything over. And actually, in terms of business model, so you're looking at maybe a cost of around £500,000 or so for this large PV system. But actually, when you value that at a yield of 6.5%, the extra capital cost that it took to put the PV on and to improve the building fabric to get the EPC higher, it was actually negated by the value that was added by the PV system. So it's probably net positive in terms of cost and value, and also we got a higher spec building out of it as well. So this is unfortunate, it's a CGI of the finished units. We haven't had any aerial shots taken. So what you see here are the skylights, not the PV systems, but essentially that's how they were laid out. Unit 1 on the left is let to Camden Town Brewery, and when we were going through the lease negotiations with them, they were really keen on having a zero carbon rated building. It's innovative, it's really on brand for what they do. Units 2 and 3 have just gone on the market, and we've got some really great interest in those today. Unit 1 and Unit 3 are 146 kilowatt peak. Unit 2, which is the biggest, Unit 2, which is the top one, is 164 kilowatt peak. Everything, as I say, is EPCA and all zero carbon rated. So hopefully that's been an interesting insight into how we approach a business model. I think really the take-home story is that as the income opportunities have reduced through FIT, you need to be a bit more investigative in terms of how you can make these things pay for themselves. And really for us, it's about sharing benefits. We don't want to charge a really high PPA to our occupiers because they're all, in industrial, all focused on units of function. So how much utility can they get out of that building for the lowest cost? And if you can save them money through something like this, it's a really great tool. Thank you for listening.